Captain Eliza Mitchell had been leading the first human crew to explore the distant planet of Xylar 9, a world that had long been rumored to harbor strange and dangerous life forms. She had trained for years for this moment, knowing the risks that came with deep space exploration. But nothing could have prepared her for the storm that tore through their ship on the planet's outskirts. The ship's hull groaned and cracked as it entered the atmosphere. Eliza gripped the controls tightly, trying to steady the craft, but it was no use. The turbulence was too intense. Sparks flew from the control panels, and alarms screamed in her ears. In seconds, the world outside the ship turned into a blur of green and blue as the craft spiraled out of control. "We're going down," Eliza shouted to her crew. The crash was sudden and brutal. The ship slammed into the dense jungle below with a deafening roar. Metal tore, and the smell of burning fuel filled the air. Eliza felt herself thrown violently against her seat, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Everything went black. When she regained consciousness, she was lying in the wreckage of the ship. Her head throbbed, and her body ached from the force of the crash. She groaned as she tried to sit up, her vision blurred. Around her, the remains of the ship were scattered across a thick forest, with towering trees and thick vines twisting around the wreckage. The landscape was unlike anything she had ever seen before, alien, eerie, and wild. "Report." Eliza coughed, trying to gather her bearings. The rest of the crew was scattered around, all of them disoriented but alive. They weren't injured too badly, but everyone was shaken. Eliza knew they didn't have much time. "Captain," a voice rasped. Sergeant Connor, the ship's weapons officer, struggled to stand. "We're not alone. Something's out there." Eliza's heart skipped a beat as she glanced around the jungle, trying to focus through the haze of pain. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, casting long, jagged shadows. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, a low growl pierced the silence. The crew froze. Eliza's instincts kicked in. She pulled out her sidearm, but her hands were shaking. She wasn't sure what to expect, some sort of predatory animal, or something much worse. Then, from the trees, came the sound of something massive moving through the foliage. From the darkness emerged figures, tall, hulking creatures, their skin shimmering with strange tattoos. Their eyes glowed eerily in the low light as they surveyed the wreckage. These were no ordinary animals. These were intelligent, terrifying beings. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. They weren't just any predators. They were hunters. "Stay calm," Eliza whispered, trying to steady her breath. "We need to move. Stay together, and don't make a sound." But it was too late. The creatures had already noticed them. In an instant, they lunged, their claws flashing in the dim light. Panic spread through the crew as they scattered in all directions, running for their lives. Eliza's mind raced as she darted into the jungle, her pulse thundering in her ears. She had no idea where she was going, but the sound of her crew members' screams drove her forward. She couldn't afford to look back. There was no time. But as Eliza fled, she caught a glimpse of one of the creatures, a massive, terrifying alien with a set of cruel fangs and an intense gaze. The alien locked eyes with her, and for a moment, Eliza's heart skipped a beat. And then, without warning, the creature stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the dense foliage. Eliza stopped, panting for air. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Why had it spared her? And more importantly, what did it want? The feeling of being hunted was now more real than ever, and Eliza knew that this was just the beginning. Their fight for survival had only just started. Eliza's heart raced as she stumbled through the dense jungle, trying to get as far from the wreckage as possible. Her breath came in short gasps, and every snap of a branch or rustle in the leaves made her jump. The creatures had vanished into the shadows, but she knew they were still out there, watching. The feeling of being hunted never left her. "Captain, over here." Sergeant Connor's voice called out from behind a thick cluster of trees. Eliza pushed forward, relieved to hear a familiar voice. When she emerged into a small clearing, she found Connor, Lieutenant Sarah, and 2 other crew members, all looking shaken but alive. "We need to get to higher ground," Connor suggested, wiping sweat from his brow. "We can't stay out here in the open. We need a plan." Eliza nodded, already assessing the situation. The jungle around them was thick, and the sunlight barely pierced through the canopy. She knew they needed to stick together and stay alert, but they couldn't keep running forever. The predators were fast, and they knew this terrain far better than any of them. "We'll move carefully," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "We need to find shelter, a place to hide and plan our next move. Stay close and keep quiet." The crew silently followed her lead as they continued their trek through the jungle. Every few minutes, Eliza glanced back over her shoulder, making sure they weren't being followed. She could feel the eyes of the creatures on them, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. After what felt like hours, they came upon a cliff edge that overlooked a wide valley. Eliza stopped, her gaze scanning the land below. The jungle stretched out for miles, a sea of green with no signs of civilization. She knew they were deep within enemy territory now. "That's it," Lieutenant Sarah said, pointing down to the valley. "We can climb down there. It's safer than staying up here." But Eliza was hesitant. There was something wrong. The valley looked too quiet, too still. She had learned from past missions that silence in alien environments was often a warning sign. Her instincts told her to hold back, but the crew was already moving. "We'll go down together," Eliza said. "Stay alert." As they descended the rocky cliffside, a sudden, bone-chilling scream echoed from below. The sound was distant but unmistakable. It sent a shockwave of fear through Eliza, and she immediately ordered the crew to stop. "What the hell was that?" Connor asked, his face pale. "I don't know," Eliza said, her mind racing. "But we're not alone." The ground beneath their feet rumbled slightly, as if something massive was moving beneath them. The jungle seemed to tremble in response. Eliza's gut tightened. They were being drawn into something far worse than they could imagine. Suddenly, the earth cracked open with a deafening roar. A massive creature, unlike anything Eliza had ever seen, erupted from the ground below them. Its body was sleek, covered in scales that shimmered in the light. It had 4 legs like a spider, and dozens of sharp, spiny limbs that reached out, grabbing anything in its path. Eliza barely had time to react before one of the crew members was dragged into the creature's grasp. The others screamed and scrambled to get away. But the creature was too fast. Its jaws snapped open, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Run," Eliza shouted, pulling the others away. In the chaos, Eliza glanced over her shoulder and saw something she couldn't believe. One of the alien hunters, the same one that had spared her life, was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching them. Without warning, the alien leaped into action. It moved with incredible speed, charging at the creature that had been hunting them. The 2 creatures collided with a bone-shaking crash, and Eliza could only watch in awe as the alien battled the monster with skill and power. In the midst of the struggle, the alien turned its glowing eyes toward Eliza, locking gazes with her. It was the same alien that had spared her life earlier. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the alien disappeared into the jungle, leaving the defeated monster behind. The crew stood frozen in shock, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. "What just happened?" Sarah whispered. Eliza couldn't answer. She was still trying to process the strange, confusing events that had just unfolded. The alien had saved them. Again. But why? "We need to move," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the confusion. "Now. And this time, we're going to be ready." The crew nodded, still shaken, but determined to survive. Eliza knew that they had barely escaped death, and the real fight for their lives was just beginning. Whatever the aliens' reasons were for helping them, they couldn't rely on it. They would have to find their own way out of this nightmare. and the clock was ticking. Eliza's thoughts raced as she led her team deeper into the jungle, still haunted by the events that had just unfolded. The alien that had intervened, the one that had spared her life, had left as suddenly as it had appeared. No one knew what to make of it, and the confusion was starting to weigh heavily on the crew. "We need shelter," Eliza said, trying to focus. The sunlight was starting to fade, and the jungle felt more oppressive with each passing minute. The strange, otherworldly noises of the planet seemed to grow louder as night approached, making her more on edge. "Where do we go?" Sergeant Connor asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "We can't just keep running. The monsters are everywhere." "We'll find a safe spot," Eliza replied, though she wasn't sure where. Her instincts told her to keep moving, to keep ahead of whatever hunted them, but it wasn't enough. They were running out of options. The jungle was thick with towering trees and massive vines, twisting and curling around each other in strange patterns. The air was heavy, filled with the sharp scent of alien flowers and the sharp buzz of distant insects. Every now and then, Eliza would hear a rustle in the bushes or see shadows moving in the corner of her eye, but when she turned, nothing was there. It was as if the jungle itself was alive, watching them. "We need to be smart about this," Eliza said, turning to her crew. "We'll find shelter for tonight, and tomorrow we'll make a plan to get out of here." But as night began to fall, the situation grew even more dangerous. The low growls and eerie sounds of the jungle creatures grew louder, and the fear of being hunted started to settle in. The crew's nerves were frayed, and they knew they couldn't survive out here for long without a plan. Just as Eliza began to consider how best to set up camp, a sudden rustling sound from the trees made everyone freeze. Their eyes locked onto the movement, a figure, tall and silent, standing on a branch just above them. Before Eliza could react, the figure dropped from the tree, landing gracefully on the ground in front of her. It was the alien. But this time, there was no hostility, no bloodthirsty growls or sharp claws. The creature, Kalora, as Eliza would later learn, stood in front of them, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She was different from the other aliens, not as massive or covered in wild tattoos. She was more slender, her movements smooth and deliberate, as if every step was calculated. "Why are you helping us?" Eliza asked, her voice filled with suspicion. "What do you want?" Kalora tilted her head, studying Eliza with a curious gaze. There was a strange intelligence in her eyes, something Eliza hadn't expected. The alien didn't speak, but she gestured for Eliza to follow her, turning and walking deeper into the jungle. After a moment of hesitation, Eliza motioned for her crew to stay close. They followed Kalora, unsure whether to trust her or not, but knowing they had little choice. The jungle was no place to fight alone. Kalora led them to a hidden clearing, where a small cave-like structure had been carved into the side of a hill. It was barely visible from the outside, concealed by thick vines and branches. Inside, the air was cool, and there was a faint scent of earth. It wasn't much, but it would provide shelter for the night. Kalora moved to the back of the cave, where she had set up some sort of makeshift camp. She gestured for the humans to sit, and although they were still unsure of her intentions, they obeyed. She didn't seem like the bloodthirsty hunter they had feared. Instead, she was calm and patient, as if she was simply waiting for something. "What do you want from us?" Eliza asked again, this time softer, as she sat down by the fire Kalora had started. "Why are you helping us?" Kalora's glowing eyes softened. She seemed to consider the question carefully before she finally made a gesture, pointing to herself, and then to Eliza, and miming an action of searching, as if she were looking for something. "You're looking for something?" Eliza asked, her curiosity growing. She gestured to Kalora's movements, hoping for a clearer answer. Kalora nodded slowly, then pointed to the group of humans. She seemed to want to explain something but struggled with words. Eliza leaned forward, her interest piqued. She was starting to see a pattern, something deeper behind Kalora's actions. I understand, Eliza said carefully. You're not like the others. You don't want to hurt us. Kalora's eyes flickered with something like relief, though her expression was still unreadable. She reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out a strange glowing crystal, offering it to Eliza. It pulsed gently in her hand, and Eliza couldn't help but wonder what its purpose was. Kalora then pointed to the sky, her gaze fixed on the stars above, and mimed an action of flight, as if indicating that she wanted to leave this planet. Her expression softened with a mixture of sadness and hope, and Eliza finally understood. Kalora wasn't just helping them for no reason. She wanted something more, a way off this planet, a way to escape her own people's bloodthirsty ways. The alien had been searching for a way out, just like the humans. Eliza looked at the glowing crystal in her hand, and then back at Kalora. There was still much they didn't know, but one thing was clear. They had an unexpected ally. And for the first time since their crash, Eliza felt a spark of hope. The night passed in uneasy silence, the hum of distant alien creatures a constant reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond the shelter of the cave. Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling of vines above her, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The alien, Kalora, was their ally, for now. But Eliza knew that trust had to be earned. There were still too many questions and too many unknowns. She glanced over at her crew, all of them lying motionless, their exhaustion finally taking over. But Eliza couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that glowing crystal Kalora had given her. It had a soft, pulsing light that seemed to hold a secret, something important. Eliza knew that the key to getting off this planet, and surviving, lay somewhere within that crystal. The alien hadn't said much. Her gestures had been simple, but they spoke volumes. Kalora seemed to want to leave the planet, to escape the chaos caused by her own people. Eliza wondered why Kalora was so different from the others. What made her help them, rather than kill them like the other aliens? There had to be a deeper reason. Suddenly, a rustling noise outside the cave caught her attention. Eliza's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, but she paused. It was too quiet. No growls, no aggressive movements, just the sound of something, or someone, moving in the jungle. She looked over at Connor, who had been keeping watch. He nodded, signaling that he'd heard it too. Eliza motioned for him to follow her, then carefully stepped outside the cave, her pulse quickening. The jungle was darker now, with only the faintest light from the stars above. The air was thick, almost oppressive, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. As Eliza and Connor moved deeper into the trees, they heard the rustling again. But this time it was closer, much closer. She gripped her weapon tighter and motioned for Connor to be silent. They moved as quietly as possible, trying to stay hidden in the dense foliage. Suddenly, the figure of Kalora appeared from behind a large tree, her glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. She held a hand out, signaling for them to stop. "Kalora," Eliza whispered, stepping forward cautiously. "What's going on?" Kalora pointed to the sky, then to the ground beneath them. She was trying to communicate something important. Eliza's heart raced as the alien made a motion with her hand, sweeping it across the sky, mimicking the shape of a ship. Eliza's mind raced. Could it be a ship? Had Kalora found a way off this planet? Kalora then pointed to the glowing crystal in Eliza's hand and mimicked an opening motion, as if indicating it could unlock something. The pieces were slowly starting to fall into place, but there was still so much they didn't understand. "We need to follow her," Eliza said to Connor, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever she's showing us, it could be our way out." Kalora turned and started walking deeper into the jungle, her movements graceful and silent. Eliza and Connor followed closely behind, the rest of the crew staying back in the cave for safety. The path Kalora led them down was strange, almost like a hidden trail through the dense trees. It wasn't easy to follow, but the alien moved with confidence, as if she knew exactly where she was going. After what felt like an hour, they reached a small clearing. At the center was an ancient-looking structure, partially hidden by the overgrown jungle. It was a ruin, weathered by time, but unmistakably alien. The walls were carved with strange symbols, and the stone beneath their feet seemed to glow faintly, as if alive. Kalora approached the structure with reverence, her eyes scanning the walls. She reached out and touched one of the symbols, causing a faint hum to fill the air. Slowly, a section of the wall began to shift, revealing a hidden chamber within. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the answer they had been searching for. The chamber beyond was filled with strange technology, shiny metal panels, alien devices, and more glowing crystals. It looked like a forgotten laboratory or some kind of control center. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and sitting on it was a small circular device that seemed to match the pattern of the crystal in Eliza's hand. Kalora pointed to the device, then to Eliza, making a motion to indicate that the crystal should be placed there. This is it," Eliza murmured, almost in disbelief. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as she placed the crystal into the pedestal slot. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire room lit up with a brilliant blue light. The walls hummed with energy, and a strange map appeared in the air, displaying a series of stars and planets, including one, Xylar 9, highlighted in a bright red glow. Kalora stepped forward and gestured to the map, then to herself. She was pointing at the highlighted planet, her expression filled with urgency. Eliza understood. This was not just a map. It was a way to escape. The device could lead them off the planet, or perhaps to a place where they could fix their ship and return home. But there was a problem. Kalora wasn't pointing to a ship or a way off the planet. She was pointing to something far more dangerous. The very heart of Xylar 9 itself. Eliza looked at Kalora, her eyes wide with realization. The truth was becoming clear. If they followed this map, they would not only be leaving the planet, they would be going straight into the heart of an alien empire. And the real battle for their survival was about to begin. Eliza stood frozen in the glowing light of the chamber, staring at the map projected in the air. The bright red marker pulsed, beckoning them toward the heart of Xylar 9. She had expected to see a route to escape, a way back to their ship, or even a safer part of the planet. Instead, she was looking at a target, a destination that was clearly deep within enemy territory. Kalora's glowing eyes met hers, filled with a quiet urgency. The alien didn't need to speak. Her message was clear. They were being led into the most dangerous part of the planet. Eliza felt a cold weight settle in her chest. If they followed the map, they would be heading straight into the heart of the Xylar 9 Empire, a place where the most powerful aliens, those that hunted her crew, resided. The place where they would be hunted again. But Kalora had brought them here for a reason. Eliza couldn't ignore the possibility that this alien knew something they didn't. There was a chance that whatever they found at the heart of the Empire was the key to their survival, or maybe even their escape. "We don't have much of a choice, do we?" Eliza said, breaking the silence. Connor looked at her, his face filled with uncertainty. "We've barely survived this long. What makes you think this is going to help us?" "I don't know," Eliza admitted. "But Kalora led us here for a reason. We need to trust her." Kalora nodded slowly, her sharp eyes fixed on the map. She didn't seem afraid, only determined. Eliza could see that the alien's mission was personal. Whatever awaited them in the heart of the Empire, Kalora had a stake in it. "I agree," Lieutenant Sarah said, stepping forward. "We need to move now. If this map shows a way out, we have to go." Eliza hesitated for a moment longer, but then she nodded. The decision had been made. They were going into the heart of Xylar 9. The jungle outside the chamber was quiet, almost eerily so. The creatures that had been hunting them earlier seemed to have disappeared, leaving only the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Eliza led the group as they made their way back toward the jungle path, Kalora leading them with her quiet confidence. As they walked, Eliza's mind raced. What was in the heart of Xylar 9 that could possibly help them? Was it a weapon, a ship, or something else entirely? And why had Kalora, an alien from the same species as the ones hunting them, decided to help them in the first place? The deeper they moved into the jungle, the darker it became. The air grew thicker, the temperature rising. It was as if the planet itself was warning them to turn back. "Eliza, look at this," Connor whispered, his voice filled with awe. Ahead of them, in the distance, strange shapes moved in the shadows. Large, humanoid figures that seemed to glide silently through the trees. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. These were no ordinary jungle creatures. These were the soldiers of Tyler-9, the same ones that had nearly killed them in the first attack. She raised a hand, signaling for the crew to stop. Kalora turned, her expression unreadable. She seemed to sense what Eliza was seeing. Without a word, she stepped forward, signaling for the humans to follow her. The alien moved with an unnatural grace, weaving between the trees and bushes, making no sound as she moved. The crew followed closely, trying to stay hidden. Every rustle in the trees, every snapping twig, felt like a death sentence. The soldiers of Tyler-9 were close, too close. They moved through the jungle for what felt like hours, every step feeling heavier than the last. Eliza could feel the weight of their journey bearing down on her. They were getting closer, and the tension in the air was thick. Soon, they would reach their destination. But what awaited them there? Finally, they arrived at the edge of a vast, dark canyon. The map had led them here, and Eliza could see what it had been pointing to. A massive, ancient-looking structure carved into the side of the canyon, its jagged edges glinting in the faint light. It was a city, or what remained of it. "This is it," Kalora said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "The heart of Tyler-9." Eliza stared at the ruins, the towering structures that rose like jagged teeth from the canyon floor. This place had once been the center of the alien empire, but now it looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But Eliza knew better. Nothing in this jungle was abandoned. There was something hidden here, something powerful. "We need to be careful," Eliza said, her voice steady. "This is their territory. They'll be watching us." Kalora stepped forward, leading the way into the ruins. Eliza and her crew followed, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The air was thick with tension, every shadow seeming to move, every whisper of wind carrying the sound of distant footsteps. As they ventured deeper into the ancient city, the silence was broken by the sudden screech of an alien beast echoing from the depths of the canyon. It was loud, terrifying, and far too close. "Eliza, look," Sarah cried, pointing ahead. At the far end of the ruins, a huge gate began to open. It was as if the city itself was coming to life, revealing what lay beyond. Eliza took a deep breath and stepped forward. They were about to find out what secrets the heart of Tyler-9 held, and whether they would be able to survive whatever awaited them. The massive gates of the ancient city groaned as they creaked open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. The air felt heavier now, thick with the remnants of a long-lost civilization. Eliza could hear the faint echo of their footsteps, but there was something else, something deep within the ruins. A low hum, like the sound of distant machinery still running, filled the silence. Kalora moved ahead without hesitation, her glowing eyes lighting the way. The rest of the crew followed closely behind, their weapons drawn and ready. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential danger, and the crew remained on edge. Eliza's heart raced. They had come this far, but now, with the massive gates closing behind them, they were truly entering the heart of Tyler-9. It was a place they had been warned about, a place filled with the unknown. If Kalora's map was to be believed, they were close to discovering something that could either save them or doom them all. "Stay sharp," Eliza whispered to her team. "We don't know what's waiting for us inside." As they moved deeper into the ruins, the walls around them began to shift, revealing strange, glowing symbols etched into the stone. They looked ancient, too old to have been created by any technology Eliza was familiar with. Yet the energy pulsing from the walls was undeniable. Whatever power this city once held, it was still alive. The narrow corridor opened into a vast chamber, and Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The room was filled with towering stone statues, each one intricately carved to represent alien figures with elongated limbs and haunting, empty eyes. In the center of the room stood an altar, adorned with more glowing crystals, similar to the one Eliza had been given. "This place," Sarah began, her voice filled with awe. "It's like a temple, but it doesn't feel like a place of worship. It feels like something else." Kalora didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward the altar, her eyes fixed on the central crystal that pulsed brightly, its glow reflecting off the walls. Eliza and her team exchanged looks, unsure of what to do next. "Is this it?" Connor asked, his voice low. "Is this the place that will help us get out of here?" Eliza nodded, but doubt lingered in her mind. They were close, so close to the answers they needed. But something about this place, its eerie stillness, felt wrong. Kalora reached out and touched the crystal. The moment her fingers made contact, a violent tremor shook the ground. The statues around them seemed to shudder, their eyes flashing with a sudden, unnatural light. The low hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through Eliza's chest. "Get back," Eliza shouted, grabbing Connor and pulling him away from the altar. But it was too late. The ground cracked open beneath their feet, and a beam of intense light shot up from the center of the room, illuminating everything around them. Eliza shielded her eyes, the light so bright it felt like it could burn her skin. "Move," Eliza ordered. The tremors were getting worse, the walls starting to crumble. They had to get out of here now. Kalora seemed unfazed by the chaos, her eyes locked on the glowing crystal as it pulsed in time with the light. She stepped back, pulling Eliza's attention toward her. With one quick motion, Kalora gestured toward a hidden passageway in the far corner of the room. "This way," Eliza shouted to her crew. "Go, go, go." They ran toward the passage, the ground shaking violently beneath their feet. Behind them, the altar began to crack, pieces of stone breaking off and falling into the glowing light below. It was as if the entire city was coming to life, awakening from centuries of slumber. As they reached the passage, Eliza glanced back one last time. The statues had all turned toward the altar, their eyes glowing brighter than ever. The energy in the air was almost overwhelming now. It felt like the entire city was watching them, judging them. "Kalora, what's happening?" Eliza asked, breathless. The alien didn't respond at first. She was watching the light, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she turned to Eliza and shook her head. "It's too late. We've activated something we shouldn't have." Eliza's stomach dropped. The urgency in Kalora's voice made her realize just how dangerous the situation was. "We need to get to the surface," Kalora continued. "Now." With no time to waste, they sprinted down the narrow passage, the walls trembling with each step they took. The further they moved, the more unstable the ruins became. It was as if the entire city was coming apart, reacting to the disturbance they had triggered. The passage opened into a vast chamber, far larger than any room they had entered so far. At the center was a massive, glowing orb that hovered in the air, casting an eerie light across the room. The orb seemed to be the source of the energy they had felt in the temple. It was pulsing, like a heartbeat, drawing the crew's attention toward it. "This is it," Kalora whispered. "The power source of Sylar-9." Eliza's eyes widened. This was what they had been searching for. The source of the alien empire's strength. And it was clear now, if they didn't destroy it, they would never leave this planet alive. "We have to destroy it," Eliza said, her voice firm. Kalora nodded slowly, her expression hardening. "I'll show you how." But before they could take action, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, growing louder by the second. They were not alone. Sylar-9's soldiers were here. and they were closing in. The footsteps grew louder, a steady rhythm of heavy boots that echoed through the chamber. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she spun toward the entrance, where dark figures emerged from the shadows. Xylar 9's soldiers. They were here, and they were closing in fast. "Get ready," Eliza shouted to her crew, her voice tense with urgency. The soldiers weren't just coming for them. They were coming to stop them from destroying the orb, the source of Xylar 9's power. If they didn't act fast, they would be trapped with no way out. Kalora moved to the front, her glowing eyes scanning the room as she prepared for what was to come. Eliza could see the determination in the alien's face. This was her fight too. Whatever was happening here, Kalora had her own stake in it. But Eliza wasn't sure if they had enough time to destroy the orb and escape. The soldiers stepped into the chamber, their eyes locked on the glowing orb. They didn't even glance at the humans. They knew what had to be done. Without warning, the soldiers raised their weapons. They weren't just carrying guns. There were energy weapons that crackled with deadly power. And the air grew tense with the anticipation of a fight. "Move," Eliza yelled, and her crew dove behind a cluster of rocks for cover, opening fire at the incoming soldiers. The bright flashes of energy weapons lit up the dark chamber, filling the air with blinding light. Eliza aimed her sidearm, her hand steadied despite the chaos around her. Kalora was already in motion, moving faster than any human could. With a fierce cry, she charged forward, her alien weapons, blades of sharp, glowing metal, flashing in the dim light. She collided with one of the soldiers, knocking him back with a swift strike. Eliza fired another shot, taking down one of the soldiers who was about to reach for a control panel. Connor and Sarah were right beside her, their guns aimed at the other soldiers, providing cover. But the enemies kept coming. More soldiers poured into the room, each one more heavily armed than the last. The battle was escalating, and Eliza realized they couldn't hold out forever. They needed to destroy the orb, and fast. "Kalora, where's the switch?" Eliza shouted over the noise of the battle. Kalora spun around, her eyes fierce. "The orb's energy is controlled from within the core. We have to reach it before they stop us." Eliza nodded. They had no choice. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. If they didn't reach the core, they were done for. The soldiers would stop them, and the power of the orb would crush them all. "We're going for it," Eliza said to her team. "Cover us." Connor, Sarah, and Kalora dove forward, shooting at anything that moved. Eliza ran beside them, her heart racing. The closer they got to the orb, the more the soldiers seemed to focus on them. Their weapons flashed, narrowly missing Eliza as she ducked behind a pillar. "Keep moving," the lizard yelled, pushing forward with all her strength. They were so close now. Just a few more steps, and they would be in range to destroy the orb. But the soldiers were closing in, surrounding them. Then, from the corner of her eye, Eliza saw something that made her blood run cold. A soldier, larger than the others, stepped forward. He was holding something, a strange device, pulsating with energy. It was a bomb. He was going to blow them all up. "No," Eliza screamed. Before she could react, Kalora moved like lightning. She lunged at the soldier with the bomb, knocking it out of his hands. The explosion never came, but the soldier retaliated, swinging a massive blade at Kalora. The alien dodged, her glowing eyes narrowing, as she disarmed him with a swift strike. The soldier crumpled to the ground. "Cover me," Kalora shouted as she sprinted toward the orb, her hands glowing with energy. She reached out and placed her palms against the surface, sending a shockwave of power through the room. Eliza, Connor, and Sarah continued to fight off the soldiers, their shots finding their marks. But the soldiers weren't backing down. They fought fiercely, knowing that the orb was their lifeline, their power source. They couldn't let the humans destroy it. Kalora pressed her hands harder against the orb, her body glowing with the energy of the planet. The orb's light flared up, sending waves of power throughout the chamber. The soldiers screamed in protest, their weapons buzzing and sparking. "It's working," Kalora yelled. "The core is destabilizing." Eliza felt a surge of hope. They were going to do it. They were going to destroy the orb and stop the power of Tyler 9. But the battle was far from over. More soldiers rushed in from the shadows, and Eliza knew they had seconds before the entire chamber was filled with enemy forces. With a final, desperate cry, Kalora pushed harder, and the orb shattered. A deafening blast of energy filled the room, knocking everyone off their feet. The soldiers staggered back, their weapons useless as the power source collapsed into nothing. As the light dimmed and the chamber fell silent, Eliza rose to her feet, breathing heavily. She looked around. The soldiers were gone, disoriented, and retreating into the shadows. The orb was destroyed, but the fight wasn't over. They had won this battle, but Kalora's people, the Empire, wouldn't give up so easily. "We need to move," Eliza said, her voice low. "This won't be over for long." Kalora nodded, her face grim. "We have to get to the surface. There are more battles ahead." With the orb gone, the power of Tyler 9 was broken. But a new fight had just begun. And for the first time, Eliza felt a flicker of hope. They had come this far, and they could survive. Together.